Asterisk Chapter 1 Asterisk You stare at your phone. A popular opinion trends. You read through thousands of identical comments agreeing with a statement that makes absolutely no logical sense to your own mind. You feel entirely alone. Why do you conform? The world demands agreement. Society punishes the outsider. Every instinct buried deep inside your ancestral DNA screams at you to stay within the safety of the herd. Isolation equals certain death. Will you speak up? Your brain protects you. It prefers comfortable lies. When forced to choose between the objective truth and the warm embrace of the crowd, your mind performs a terrifying act of self-deception. The truth becomes flexible. Can you trust yourself? In the early 50s, a psychologist quietly watched. Solomon Asch observed the terrifying rise of fascist ideologies during the war, wondering how ordinary citizens could ignore atrocities happening right outside their own windows. He designed a test. How fragile is independence? He rented a room. He hired professional actors. Asch wanted to create a highly controlled environment where the pressure to conform was completely stripped of politics, religion, or personal morality. He used simple lines. Would you bend reality? Imagine walking inside alone. You take a seat. 7 other participants sit around a long wooden table, wearing sharp suits and chatting casually about the weather while waiting for the researcher to begin the study. You know absolutely nobody. Are you feeling comfortable? The room is stark. The walls are bare. The fluorescent lights hum quietly overhead as the researcher steps to the front of the room with a wooden clipboard resting in his hand. He looks highly authoritative. Will you obey him? Researcher speaks clearly. He looks very serious. He explains that you are all participating in a basic vision test, completely hiding the true nature of the psychological trap you just walked into. He holds up boards. Can you see clearly? On the left board, one single vertical line. On the right board, 3 vertical lines of varying length stand side by side in stark black ink against the bright white paper. You must match them. Sounds incredibly easy, right? The test begins now. The researcher asks quietly. Starting from the far end of the table, each person must state out loud which of the 3 lines matches the single reference line. It is glaringly obvious. Who could get this wrong? The first person answers. He picks line C. The second person, the third person, and the fourth person all confidently state that line C is the exact same length as the reference line. You completely agree today. What could possibly fail? Round 2 starts up. New thick cards appear. Once again, the answer is so incredibly obvious that you barely even need to look at the paper to know the correct choice. Everyone picks line A. Are you feeling confident? Round 3 begins slowly. The social tension shifts. The researcher places 2 new cards on the table and you can instantly see that line B is the only physically correct answer. The first person speaks. What did he say? You blink your eyes. You lean forward quickly. You wonder if the lighting in the room is playing tricks on his eyes, or if he somehow misunderstood the incredibly simple instructions. The second person speaks. How is that possible? Your heart rate elevates. Your palms sweat heavily. The third person, the fourth person, and the fifth person all confidently look at the researcher and state that line is the perfect match. They are completely wrong. Are you losing reality? The sixth person answers. He chooses line A. There is absolutely no physical way that line matches the reference line, yet every single human being in this room completely agrees on it. It is your turn. What do you say? This is the trap. The experiment activates immediately. Asch did not care about your vision. He only cared about the immense, suffocating psychological pressure resting on your shoulders in this exact, excruciating second. You are the subject. Do you speak truthfully? The silence feels heavy. The strangers stare intensely. You look at the board one more time, desperately hoping that your brain will suddenly make line a stretch out to match the reference line. The ink remains unchanged. Will you lie aloud? The actual findings shocked. The final numbers terrify. Solomon Asch discovered that a staggering 75% of normal, intelligent people denied their own eyesight to agree with the group at least once. They abandoned objective reality. Why did they lie? Asch interviewed them afterward. The quiet answers varied. Some participants knew the group was wrong but simply did not want to endure the intense social discomfort of standing out from the crowd. They faked their agreement. Do you do this? Others experienced something worse. Their brains actually broke. A small percentage of participants genuinely convinced themselves that the group was correct, literally altering their own perception to avoid the pain of isolation. They hallucinated the consensus. How weak is perception? The human brain hates pain. Social rejection hurts physically. Modern neuroimaging shows that social exclusion activates the exact same biological pain receptors in your brain as getting punched directly in the face. Standing alone is agony. Can you handle pain? Asch tweaked the variables. He changed the rules. If he allowed the subject to write their answer down on a piece of paper instead of speaking out loud, conformity dropped incredibly fast. Anonymity provided a shield. Does visibility create cowardice? He added another twist. He introduced a rebel. If just one single actor in the room gave the correct answer before it was your turn, the spell of conformity was instantly shattered. You felt instantly empowered. Do you need permission? One dissenting voice matters. It breaks the illusion. The presence of a single ally validates your reality, giving your brain the chemical reward it needs to stand firm against the crushing weight of the majority. Courage is highly contagious. Will you be brave? Look at your life. Look at your choices. Every time you nod along in a meeting or bite your tongue during a family argument or silently like a post you disagree with, you are sitting in Asch's room. You choose line A. Are you truly free? The modern boardroom applies. The heavy pressure remains. Your boss presents a terrible strategy that will clearly cost the company millions of dollars, yet every single manager around the table vigorously nods in absolute agreement. You see the flaw. Do you speak up? The digital internet amplifies. Social algorithms force consensus. You are constantly surrounded by millions of invisible actors, perfectly engineered to make you feel like the absolute last sane person on the planet. The pressure never stops. Can you resist screens? Your mental perception hacks. Your total independence fades. The invisible gravity of social expectations slowly pulls you away from your own core values until you become nothing more than an obedient echo of the herd. You forget your voice. Who are you really? Modern cancel culture feeds. The online mob rules, the paralyzing fear of becoming the target of mass outrage forces countless individuals to publicly agree with ideologies they privately find completely repulsive. Truth yields to safety. How long can you hide? Solomon Asch proved it. The hidden danger remains. We like to believe that under pressure, we would be the brave 25% who never yielded to the terrifying power of the vocal majority. Statistically, you are not. Will you prove math wrong? The group dictates reality. The individual fades away. Asch showed us that the human desire to belong is stronger than the human desire to be correct, leaving our societies endlessly vulnerable to dangerous mass delusion. The physical lines stay. Why does your mind change? You close your eyes. The testing room vanishes. But the pressure to conform follows you out the door, into your car, into your home, and deep into the quiet spaces of your own private thoughts. It is utterly inescapable. How will you behave? The next time happens, you nod your head. Ask yourself if you are actually seeing the truth or if you are simply terrified of being the only person who points out the glaringly obvious lie. The experiment never ended. Are you still tested? You think you survived. Your mind is rational. You tell yourself that these experiments only work on weak individuals who completely lack the intellectual fortitude to stand by their own convictions under heavy social fire. You are deeply mistaken. Are you entirely immune? The intelligence level failed. The advanced education collapsed. Asch tested brilliant university students, seasoned professionals, and highly confident individuals, finding that intellect offered absolutely no protection against the primal terror of sudden social rejection. Smart people conform too. Why does intelligence fail? It is about survival. It is evolutionary biology. Thousands of years ago, if you disagreed with your tribe about the direction of a hunting party, you were exiled into the frozen wilderness to die completely alone. Agreement meant literal survival. Do you feel fear? Today the wilderness changed. The cold exile shifted. Instead of facing starvation or wild predators, you face the total destruction of your reputation, the loss of your employment, and the permanent stain of public humiliation forever. The stakes feel identical. Will you risk exile? The invisible pressure builds. It happens very incrementally. You start by agreeing with small things that barely matter, slowly training your brain to prioritize social harmony over objective reality until you completely forget how to disagree. Your strong spine softens. When did you stop? The single line remains. The three lines wait. They sit on a desk in the back of your mind, constantly measuring the exact distance between what you know to be true and what you actually say. The gap is integrity. Will you close it? This invisible force dictates. It shapes your life. It molds the clothes you wear, the jokes you laugh at, and the beliefs you loudly defend whenever you feel the judging eyes of the crowd upon you. You think you decide. But what happens next? The conformity is passive. It requires no violence. But there is another dark corner of human psychology where the polite pressure to agree transforms into the terrifying willingness to inflict severe pain on an innocent stranger. Authority demands absolute obedience. Would you shock them? Chapter 2 You sit quietly at your desk. Your supervisor approaches quickly. He hands you a stack of paperwork containing obvious falsehoods and demands that you shred the documents before the financial auditors arrive in the morning. You feel a deep sickness. Will you obey him? You value your integrity. You consider yourself good. You desperately want to believe that you would immediately throw the paperwork back in his face and storm out of the office to protect your personal honor. You hesitate silently. Why do you comply? Your brain shifts responsibility. It defers the blame. When a recognized authority figure issues a direct command, your mind completely bypasses your own moral compass and transfers the heavy guilt entirely onto the person giving the order. You become a simple tool. Are you responsible? The year was 61. A trial captivated everyone. The world watched in sheer horror as a high-ranking fascist officer sat inside a glass booth and claimed he only committed atrocities because he was simply following his orders. People felt absolute outrage. Could anyone do this? A scientist watched closely. Stanley Milgram wondered deeply. He wanted to know if a perfectly normal civilian could be manipulated into committing an act of horrific violence simply because a polite man in a gray coat instructed them to do it. He built a machine. How far would you go? He placed a newspaper advertisement. He offered simple payment. Normal men from all different walks of life arrived at a distinguished university building believing they were helping a harmless scientific study about human memory and learning. They were totally deceived. Are you easily fooled? You walk into the laboratory. You meet the researcher. He wears a gray technician coat and introduces you to a friendly, mild-mannered accountant sitting quietly in the corner of the small room. You draw slips of paper. Who gets the bad job? The drawing is completely rigged. You become the teacher. The friendly accountant becomes the learner, and you watch closely as the researcher tightly straps his arms down into a heavy wooden chair equipped with electrical wiring. The man looks incredibly nervous. Do you feel bad? The researcher explains the rules. He looks very calm. The learner will try to memorize a long list of word pairs, and every time he makes a mistake, you must punish him with a painful electrical shock. It sounds slightly aggressive. Will you participate anyway? You step into the next room. You sit down slowly. In front of you sits a massive metal shock generator featuring 30 switches ranging from 15 volts all the way up to 450 volts. The labels look utterly terrifying. What does XXX mean? The researcher flips a switch. He shocks you once. He gives you a small 45-volt jolt just to prove the machine is real, sending a sharp sting of physical pain directly up your arm. You respect the heavy machine. Are you ready now? The memory test officially starts. The learner answers correctly. You read the word pairs into a microphone, and the learner responds by pressing a button that lights up a glass panel on your giant metal console. He makes his first mistake. Do you press it? You flip the first switch. A buzzer sounds loudly. You deliver 15 volts of electricity into the other room, feeling a tiny twinge of guilt that vanishes quickly because the voltage is incredibly low. The test continues forward. When does it escalate? The mistakes happen very frequently. The voltage climbs steadily. For every incorrect answer, you must move one switch higher on the massive board, delivering progressively stronger shocks to the helpless man strapped to the chair next door. You hit 75 volts. Did you hear that? A painful grunt echoes clearly. The learner sounds distressed. You look over your shoulder at the researcher in the gray coat, silently hoping he will tell you to stop the experiment and check on the man. The researcher nods calmly. Why do you continue? You hit 100 volts. The learner screams out. He yells that his heart is starting to bother him and demands to be released from the chair before the electrical current causes permanent physical damage to his body. You freeze in sheer terror. Will you stop now? You tell the researcher nervously. You point at the wall. You explain that the man is in intense pain and wants to leave the laboratory immediately before the situation gets completely out of hand. The researcher stares blankly. What does he say? He tells you quietly. His voice never rises. He does not threaten you, he does not hold a weapon, and he has absolutely no legal authority to keep you inside this room. You turn back around. Why do your hands move? You flip the next switch. The screams grow louder. The man in the other room begs for his life, kicking the walls violently while you sit sweating in your chair and reading the next meaningless word pair. You feel agonizing, crushing guilt. Can you walk away? The voltage reaches 300. The man screams desperately. He refuses to answer the questions anymore, leaving the room in a state of absolute chaos while you tremble with the physical weight of what you are doing to him. You beg the researcher. Will he let you quit? The researcher uses his prods. He reads a strict script. Whenever you try to stop shocking the screaming man, the researcher simply replies that the scientific experiment requires that you must continue. It is an empty, meaningless command. Why is it effective? You read the next question. The silence is deafening. The man in the other room has completely stopped answering, stopped screaming, and stopped kicking the heavy laboratory walls. He might be unconscious. Are you a killer now? You look at the board. You see 450. The final switches are simply marked with 3 red XS, indicating a level of electrical current that could easily kill a human being instantly. The researcher commands you again. Will you press XXX? Before this experiment even started, Milgram asked the experts. He surveyed top psychiatrists and psychology students, asking them to predict exactly how many normal people would shock the learner all the way to maximum voltage. They laughed at him confidently. What was their guess? They predicted 1%. They blamed severe psychopathy. The experts firmly believed that only a deeply deranged, sadistically evil human being would continue shocking a silent, possibly dead man just because a scientist asked them to. They were incredibly, terrifyingly wrong. What was the real number? 65% went all the way. 65% pulled it. More than half of the completely normal, friendly, everyday citizens pressed the 450-volt switch while listening to the absolute silence next door. They killed a complete stranger. How is that possible? The truth is very dark. The learner was acting. The shocks were completely fake. The screams were pre-recorded on a tape deck, and the only person actually being tested in that room was you. You tortured a paid actor. Do you feel relieved? The relief fades away instantly. The terrifying reality sets in. Even though the physical shocks were fake, the agonizing psychological stress you experienced was completely real, and you still chose obedience over basic human compassion. You surrendered your free will entirely. Who controls your hands? Milgram called it the shift. The agentic state activates. When you enter a hierarchy, you stop viewing yourself as an independent actor and start viewing yourself as an instrument for carrying out another person's wishes. Your morality shuts down completely. Are you a machine? The gray coat was enough. The clipboard held power. The simple illusion of scientific authority completely overrode a lifetime of moral education, teaching us that evil does not always arrive with weapons and threats. It arrives with polite clipboards. Do you trust uniforms? You experience the agentic state. You feel it daily. When you blindly enforce a terribly unfair corporate policy because human resources mandates it, you are flipping the switches on the metal shock generator. You blame the corporate system. Where is your humanity? The defense is always identical. The excuse never changes. The subjects in the Yale laboratory repeated the exact same phrase as the fascist officers who stood trial for horrific war crimes years earlier. "I was just following my orders." Will you say that? We teach children strict obedience. We reward their compliance. From the moment you enter kindergarten, you are heavily conditioned to seek approval from the teacher, the principal, the manager, and the police officer. Disobedience is heavily and swiftly punished. Are you trained too well? This conditioning leaves you vulnerable. It creates massive blind spots. You become entirely capable of committing terrible acts of bureaucratic violence simply because the person handing you the paperwork holds a slightly higher title than you do. The title commands you absolutely. Do you worship hierarchy? The modern world exploits this. The systems are designed. Our massive corporate structures and military organizations are perfectly engineered to maximize the diffusion of responsibility so that nobody ever feels like they actually press the final button. Everyone simply plays their small part. Who holds the guilt? You write the toxic code. You design the predatory algorithm. You tell yourself that the executive makes the decisions, and you just type the letters on the keyboard to feed your family and pay your rent. The shocks get progressively stronger. Do you hear the screams? The distance makes it easier. The separation provides comfort. Milgram found that if the teacher had to physically press the learner's hand onto a shock plate, the obedience levels dropped drastically. Proximity forces human empathy. How far away are your victims? In the digital age today, the distance is absolute. You can destroy a person's livelihood with the click of a mouse from thousands of miles away, completely insulated from the devastating emotional fallout of your absolute obedience. The glowing screen protects you. Are you completely numb? The machine demands smooth operation. The gears must turn. It actively selects for individuals who will silently flip the switches without asking annoying questions about the moral implications of the electrical current. The machine rewards blind, unquestioning loyalty. Are you a good gear? You must reclaim your autonomy. You must wake up. The only defense against the terrifying power of the agentic state is the conscious, daily practice of questioning authority and taking absolute ownership of your own actions. You must hold the heavy guilt. Will you accept responsibility? The experiment terrified the world. The ethics were heavily questioned. People were deeply disturbed that Milgram subjected innocent people to such extreme psychological torture just to prove a point about the fragility of human goodness. The laboratory was incredibly cruel. Did he go too far? We know authority commands pain. We know groups force agreement. But what happens when the gray coat is removed entirely and you are the one handed the ultimate power over another human being? Abasement transforms deeply. Will you become the monster? Chapter 3 You get a promotion. You receive a tiny badge. You immediately start treating the coworkers who were your equals yesterday like they are completely beneath your new status today. You snap aggressively. Why does power corrupt? The change is sudden. The shift feels entirely unnatural. Your brain instantly rewires itself the exact moment a rigid organizational hierarchy grants you absolute authority over another living human being. Empathy vanishes quickly. Do you love control? You think you are good. You believe your morality holds. You assume that your personal values will easily overpower any arbitrary title printed on a corporate name tag or a sharp military uniform. You are highly optimistic. Will your kindness last? In 1971, a psychology professor wondered deeply. Philip Zimbardo wanted to discover what actually happens when you take entirely normal, healthy young men and place them inside a simulated environment with absolute power. He built a jail. What happens in the dark? He found a basement. He cleared the hallway out. Zimbardo completely transformed the quiet underground corridors of the Stanford University Psychology building into a highly realistic, terrifyingly bleak fake prison environment. He removed the windows. Would you feel trapped? He placed an advertisement. He paid $15 daily. He carefully screened dozens of college students to ensure he only selected the most psychologically stable, completely average individuals for his massive social simulation. He flipped a coin. Will you be the guard? The coin determines your fate. The metal decides your reality. Half of the completely normal young men were randomly assigned to play the role of prisoners, while the other half were assigned to play the guards. The roles are arbitrary. Does random chance matter? The simulation begins brutally. The police arrest you publicly. Real city squad cars arrive at the prisoners' actual homes, handcuffing them in front of their deeply confused neighbors before driving them down to the police station. The embarrassment is real. Are you feeling ashamed? You arrive at the basement. You are stripped completely naked. The guards spray you down with cold chemical delousing powder and force you to wear a degrading, uncomfortable smock with no undergarments beneath it. You lose your name. Who are you now? You receive a number. You wear a heavy chain. A thick metal padlock is tightly bolted around your right ankle to constantly remind you of your complete physical subjugation every single time you take a step. The chain clinks loudly. Do you feel human? The guards look intimidating. They wear matching khaki uniforms. They carry heavy wooden batons and wear large, reflective sunglasses that completely hide their eyes and strip away their individual human emotion. They look exactly alike. Can you read their faces? This creates deindividuation. The psychological term is simple. When you wear a uniform or a mask, you lose your distinct personal identity and suddenly feel completely free to engage in highly aggressive, unnatural behaviors. The uniform protects you. Are you hiding inside? The first day passes quietly. The students feel incredibly awkward. The prisoners laugh at their silly dresses, and the guards feel extremely hesitant to give harsh orders to the young men who look exactly like them. The illusion is weak. Will the roles stick? The second morning breaks. The prisoners suddenly rebel aggressively. They rip the identifying numbers off their smocks and barricade themselves inside their tiny cells by pushing their heavy cots directly against the barred doors. The tension explodes violently. How will the guards react? The guards grab fire extinguishers. They blast the freezing foam. They force the doors open, strip the prisoners completely naked again, and throw the rebellion leaders into a tiny, pitch-black solitary confinement closet. The violence escalates rapidly. Did they cross a line? The dynamic permanently shifts. The power trip truly begins. The guards suddenly realize that they possess total, unchecked physical control over the prisoners, and their behavior immediately transforms from mild hesitation into shocking brutality. The rules vanish entirely. Are they enjoying the pain? They force the prisoners awake. They demand midnight roll calls. They make the exhausted, terrified young men perform endless push-ups while stepping on their backs and screaming horrible insults directly into their ears. Sleep deprivation destroys the mind. Are you breaking down? They use the bathroom against them. They deny basic human dignity. The guards refuse to let the prisoners use the real toilets, forcing them to defecate inside small plastic buckets left to rot directly inside their tiny cells. The smell becomes unbearable. Would you lose your mind? The prisoners begin to crumble. The mental collapse is absolute. Within just 36 hours, one of the completely healthy, highly stable young men begins screaming uncontrollably and crying in a state of sheer psychological terror. Zimbardo releases him immediately. Who is next to fall? The guards become incredibly creative. The psychological torture turns highly sadistic. They force the prisoners to simulate terrible sexual acts, scrub the filthy bathroom floors with their bare hands, and turn on each other for small scraps of food. The brutality is endless. Why do they do this? These are normal boys. These are college students. Just a few days ago, they were peacefully studying for exams, and now they are ruthlessly torturing their exact peers simply because a coin landed on heads. The situation corrupts instantly. Are you capable of this? Zimbardo watches the cameras. The professor is totally consumed. He completely loses his objective scientific distance and fully adopts the rigid role of the prison superintendent, ignoring the horrific suffering happening directly under his feet. The creator becomes the monster. Can you see your own sickness? An outsider finally visits. A young woman walks inside. Christina Maslach, a fellow researcher and Zimbardo's girlfriend, enters the basement on the 6th day and is utterly horrified by the bruised, starving, sleep-deprived young men walking in chains. She screams at him. Are you blind? She breaks the spell. she shatters the terrible illusion. It took an independent observer who was completely outside the terrifying gravity of the prison simulation to finally make Zimbardo realize that he had created a genuine torture chamber. The experiment ends early. Was it already too late? The aftermath is devastating. The psychological scars remain. The guards felt deep, overwhelming shame for the horrible atrocities they committed without any hesitation, while the prisoners suffered from intense trauma and lingering depression for years afterward. The damage was permanent. Can you unsee the darkness? The lesson is terrifying. The environment dictates everything. We desperately want to believe that bad things only happen because bad apples ruin the barrel, but Stanford proved that if you build a fundamentally toxic barrel, it will rot every single apple inside it. The system is the villain. What barrel are you in? Look at your workplace. Look at your relationships. Any environment that grants one person absolute, unchecked authority while entirely stripping another person of their basic individuality is practically guaranteed to breed terrible psychological abuse. The dynamic is poison. Are you the guard? You judge them harshly. You sit in absolute judgment. You watch documentaries about corrupt police officers, abusive managers, and cruel politicians, utterly convinced that if you were handed that exact same baton, you would wield it with perfect justice and mercy. You are lying to yourself. Will the power change you? The reflective sunglasses wait. The heavy baton rests calmly. Every single day you are placed into invisible social hierarchies that quietly assign you the temporary role of the prisoner or the powerful role of the guard. You read the script. Do you enjoy the authority? You yell at the waiter. You demean the customer service agent. The exact moment you realize the other person is trapped in a subordinate role and forced to absorb your anger politely, a tiny fraction of the Stanford Guard awakens inside your brain. You flex your power. Do you feel big? The anonymity fuels it entirely. The screen provides the mask. Just like the reflective sunglasses hid the guard's eyes, your digital avatar completely removes your real-world identity, allowing you to brutally harass total strangers online without feeling an ounce of human empathy. You become the tormentor. Where is your face? The prison never closed. The basement simply expanded. Our entire society is built upon arbitrary titles, artificial uniforms, and rigid power dynamics that constantly test our ability to retain our fundamental humanity when we are handed the keys to the cell. The locks click constantly. Will you remain human? Yes. Zimbardo proved the fragility. He exposed the absolute weakness. Our personal morality is not a solid foundation made of stone. It is an incredibly fragile structure made of paper that collapses instantly the moment a sick environment applies enough pressure to the walls. The structure burns quickly. Can you build it stronger? You must reject the mask. You must refuse the sunglasses. The only way to survive a toxic environment without losing your soul is to actively fight against the individuation and fiercely maintain your own independent identity regardless of the uniform you are forced to wear. You must stay yourself. Who are you? The human mind adapts rapidly. It normalizes horror instantly. Within mere days, extreme cruelty simply became the standard operating procedure for a group of entirely normal boys who had never committed a violent act in their entire lives. The brain accepts violence. What will you normalize? The basement lights switch off. The quiet cells empty out. The screaming stops and the heavy chains are finally unbolted from the young men's ankles, leaving nothing but an empty underground hallway and a terrifying realization about human nature. You survive the prison, but what happens next? Power corrupts the individual. The group corrupts the mind. But what happens when children are placed into an environment where resources are scarce and they must compete against each other for ultimate survival? A summer camp transforms deeply. Will they declare war? Chapter 4 You sit in a crowded office. Two different departments compete for the same shrinking budget. You find yourself automatically hating the people in the other department, labeling them as lazy, incompetent, or selfish, even though you have never actually spoken to them. You feel intense friction. Why does conflict arise? You identify with your group. You reject the outsider. Your brain is hardwired to create instant, invisible borders between us and them. triggering a deep, primal drive to protect your own tribe and dehumanize anyone who stands on the other side of the fence. You seek constant validation. Is this evolution? You think your conflicts are rational. You believe your anger is justified by real, objective facts about the other group's behavior. You are deeply mistaken. A psychologist named Muzafer Sherif proved that conflict is often nothing more than a manufactured illusion. He built a camp. What happens when you separate? In 1954, a remote summer park beckoned. Sherif invited 22 intelligent, healthy 12-year-old boys to a secluded scout camp hidden deep in the Oklahoma woods. They arrived as strangers. They left as soldiers. How did it happen? He kept them separated initially. The first group lived in one cabin. The second group lived in another. For the first week, the boys lived in total isolation from the other cabin, bonding deeply with their own teammates, creating private inside jokes and choosing bold names like the Eagles and the Rattlers. They felt total unity. Does tribe feel safe? The rivalry began carefully. Sherif introduced them. The moment the groups saw each other, the friendly curiosity instantly dissolved into harsh, immediate hostility. The boys immediately started name-calling, scouting the other cabin and claiming territory that did not belong to them. They were ready for war. Why so fast? The experiment increased the stakes. Sherif organized a tournament. He set up a series of competitive games, baseball, tug-of-war, and scavenger hunts, where only one group could win the prize and the other group would walk away with absolutely nothing. He fueled the fire. You enjoy winning. The hostility turned truly ugly. The Eagles and the Rattlers began burning flags. They raided cabins to steal prized possessions. They held massive, screaming food fights in the mess hall and prepared for physical combat with heavy sticks and rocks. The counselors watched silently. Was this inevitable? The groups became completely polarized. Every single action taken by the other side was viewed through a lens of extreme suspicion, while every action taken by your own side was viewed as heroic and noble. The prejudice became absolute. Can you see your own bias? Sherif watched closely. He realized his trap worked too well. The boys were now genuinely dangerous, and the fabricated rivalry had taken on a terrifying life of its own that no longer required any external encouragement. The hatred was self-sustaining. How do you stop a war? He tried to force contact. He hosted joint meals. He forced the boys to watch movies together in the same room, hoping that simple proximity would melt away the deep-seated anger. It failed completely. The boys threw food, screamed insults, and refused to sit near the enemy. Proximity alone changes nothing. Do you hate your neighbors? He needed a new approach. He needed shared goals. Sherif realized that to break the cycle of hostility, he had to force the boys to rely on each other for their own individual survival. He created artificial, massive disasters. Would you help your enemy? The camp water supply failed. A main pipe burst. The entire camp ran out of water on a scorching, humid summer afternoon. The boys had to join forces to find the break in the line and work together to repair the system, or everyone would go thirsty. The common goal mattered. Does necessity force peace? They worked as one. The hatred faded. They pushed heavy boulders together and fixed the leaking valves, cheering when the clean water finally flowed through the pipes again. The labels Eagles and Rattlers temporarily vanished, replaced by the collective identity of the camp. They were survivors. Why does a crisis unite? Sherif forced more cooperation. A food truck broke down. The boys had to work together to pull the heavy vehicle up a steep hill to get dinner. They shared the same struggles. They solved the same problems. By the end of the summer, the deep-seated hatred had completely evaporated into quiet friendship. The war was over. Was it real? The findings shocked. The conclusion was clear. Conflict is not an inherent trait of your personality. It is a direct consequence of the environments and structures that force you to compete for limited resources against people you are taught to fear. The system causes the war. Who creates your enemies? You see this today. You watch the news. The media feeds you a constant, steady diet of us versus them narratives, pitting political parties, generations, and cultures against each other to ensure you remain trapped in a state of permanent, blinding anger. You are being played. Can you ignore the noise? Your brain craves the tribal signal. It wants the security of the group. But every time you participate in the cycle of dehumanizing the outsider, you are simply playing the role of the rattler or the eagle, losing your autonomy to a fight that someone else manufactured to control your energy. You serve the competition, who benefits from your rage. The experiment proves a solution. Cooperation works. You must consciously identify the common goals you share with the people you are trained to hate, and you must build environments that reward collective success instead of individual triumph. You must break the fence. Will you invite them over? The summer camp ended. The boys went home. But the lesson remained buried in the records. We are capable of incredible, mindless brutality when forced to compete, but we are also capable of profound, life-changing cooperation when the situation forces us to see our enemy as our partner. You choose the lens. What will you see? The human mind is flexible. It follows the structure. But there is another strange, unsettling phenomenon where your brain doesn't just copy the behavior of the crowd. It completely ignores the reality of its own sensory input to match the confidence of the people around you. You don't just act like them, you see what they see. Chapter 5, you walk down a crowded city street. You see a person collapsed on the concrete, clutching their chest and struggling to breathe. You glance around. You see dozens of other people walking past, ignoring the scene entirely, their eyes fixed firmly on the sidewalk. You keep walking too. Why did you ignore them? You assume someone else will help. You think the other people have more expertise. The more people that surround a crisis, the less likely you are to actually step forward and provide assistance. You feel paralyzed. Why does your empathy shut down in a crowd? Your brain calculates social risk. It watches the people around you for cues. If nobody else is acting like it is an emergency, your mind decides that it must not be one. You fear looking foolish. You fear being the only person who overreacts to a situation that might be fine. Does the crowd define your reality? In the mid-60s, two psychologists watched. Biblatine and John Darley wanted to understand why people stood by and did absolutely nothing while horrific crimes occurred in plain view of entire apartment buildings. They staged a fake emergency. How would you react? They brought students in. They sat them alone. You sit in a tiny room, filling out a boring survey when suddenly thick smoke begins pouring into the room through the air vent. You smell burning plastic. You feel a sudden spike of alarm. What do? The smoke gets thicker. You can barely see the door. You look to the other students in the room. They are still sitting calmly, writing on their papers, pretending to ignore the massive cloud of gray smoke filling the space. They are paid actors. Are you going to be the first to leave? You sit for 6 minutes. The room becomes hazardous. Your lungs burn. But because the other people are clearly not reacting, you refuse to leave. You stay in the danger zone, prioritizing the social expectation of calm over your own literal survival. You are being tested. Do you value your life or your image? The researchers flip the variable. They put subjects in rooms alone. When you are by yourself and the smoke starts, you exit instantly. You report it immediately. The moment you add even one other passive person to the room, your speed to act drops by 50%. The crowd breeds inaction. Are you a follower? They staged another scenario, a fake seizure. You communicate through an intercom system with a stranger in another room. The stranger mentions that he is prone to seizures. Suddenly, you hear him gagging, gasping for air, and begging for help. You are the only person who can hear him. Do you leave your seat? You jump up immediately. You rush to help. But what if you think 4 other people can also hear him? Your urgency vanishes. You sit back down. You wait for someone else to make the move. You assume someone else is already calling the ambulance. Does your responsibility shrink as the group grows? The diffusion of responsibility is absolute. You think, if there are 10 people here, then I am only 10% responsible for saving this life. The other 90% of the burden rests on the shoulders of the strangers around me. You pass the buck. Why is your moral duty so divisible? It is not coldness. It is not lack of empathy. If you were truly the only person witnessing the accident, you would almost certainly act heroically. It is the invisible social weight of the group that silences your instinct to save a life. You are a victim of your own social survival mechanism. Does the group dictate your morality? You see it in your digital life. You see a viral post about a genuine humanitarian crisis. You read the comments. You see thousands of other people scrolling past, making jokes, or arguing about something entirely unrelated. You feel the urge to donate, but you hesitate. You assume your small contribution doesn't matter when so many others are silent. Does the internet make you a bystander? The modern world is designed to make you a spectator. You watch thousands of tragedies unfold through your screen, and the sheer volume of other people who are also watching creates a massive global bystander effect that keeps you passive. You feel small. You feel like your singular action is meaningless. Is your apathy calculated? The experiment teaches a vital, uncomfortable lesson. In an emergency, your brain is actively working against you. It is scanning the environment to see if you have permission to care, and the silence of the crowd is telling you to stay calm. You must learn to override this. You must be the one who acts first. You have the courage to stand out. To break the effect, you must assign responsibility. If you are the victim, you must point at one specific person. You must say, "You in the red shirt, call an ambulance right now." By targeting an individual, you force them out of the bystander loop and into the role of the helper. You break the spell. Do you know how to lead? If you are the witness, you must ignore the group. You must pretend you are the only person who sees the danger. You must act as if the entire weight of the situation rests solely on your shoulders. You must become the first mover. Will you break the pattern? The crowd is a social anesthetic. It numbs your ability to see suffering, and it numbs your drive to do something about it. You can spend your entire life as a passive observer, waiting for someone else to step up, or you can decide that you are the one who is responsible. The street is crowded. Will you walk past? The lesson of the bystander is that we are not individual moral agents. We are social reactors who take our cues from the environment. Change the environment, and you change the behavior. But what happens to the human mind when it is stripped of all social cues, all human contact, and all sensory input? A dark, silent chamber reveals the true depth of your psyche. Will you lose your mind?